What's up YouTube, this is Dennis Panuta for tutorialsEU. In this video you are going to learn how to use loops in Kotlin, and we're going to look at while loops, do while loops and for loops in this video. And this is going to be super important because the cool thing is it allows you to execute code multiple times depending on a certain condition or on a counter or whatever you want to set it up with. So before we get started, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and leave a comment if you have some remarks or questions. And now let's get started. And we're going to start with the while loop. So a while loop executes a block of code repeatedly as long as a given condition is true. So we're looking at this while keyword, then we have a condition in the brackets, in the square brackets, and then in the curly brackets we have the code that should be executed as long as the condition is true. So now if we look at a specific example, it could look like this. So we have a variable called x and it should be 1. So it starts with the value of 1, and then we compare and say as long as x is less or equal to 10, we want to execute the following code. We want to say x. So it should just print the value of x, nothing more than that. All right. So if we do it like this, then we get an infinite loop because this while statement will always be true because 1 is always less than 10 or equal to 10. So what we need to do is we need to at one point lead to an end for this condition. So this condition has to end at one point. It's really important. It can either be done through whatever happens within the while loop, or it can be done from outside. So let's say we execute something as long as the mouse is moving. As soon as the mouse is not moving anymore, we don't execute it. This is a very basic example, and this is something that probably shouldn't happen. But if you look at our mouse, while we're moving it, it's also changing its position in our UI. Even though, of course, it will not be executed via a while loop, how the mouse is displayed, but it's going to be something that really is calculated all the time, meaning our screen, so refreshing the whole screen and displaying the position of the mouse at a specific point. All right, so this while loop will be executed all the time until the point where the condition is not true anymore. So we need to actively lead to an end of this condition, meaning that we can do something such as incrementing x each time that this while loop is executed. So what will happen now is our x is 1 in the first iteration, then this condition is checked. So is 1 less or equal to 10? It's true. So execute the code block. And in the code block, it's just going to print x, whatever x is, in our case 1. And then it's going to increase x by 1, which means that in the next iteration, it's going to be 2. So we check, is 2 less or equal 10? It's true. All right. So please execute the code block. So it's going to print 2 and increment x by 1. So it's going to be 3 in the next iteration. And that's how it's going to go until it's at 10. So it's going to check 10 less equal 10 is true. All right. So execute the block, print 10, increase x by 1, which means x is going to be 11 now. So we check, is 11 less or equal to 10? No, it's not. So don't execute the block anymore, but go to the next line of code, whatever that will be. So if we have something here, while loop is done, only then this while loop is done, code will be executed. So let's execute this code, and we see 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and while loop is done. Now, if you want to print them next to each other and not line by line, you can, of course, instead of writing print ln, just print it, and it will print it just next to each other. So there we are, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth, while loop is done. Now, by the way, what if you want this while loop to be in the next line? So with this text here, while loop is done. Well, how you can do it is you can add an additional line break manually. How would you do that? Well, you do a \n here. This \n is not going to be interpreted as an n and as a string, but it's just going to say, or it's going to be interpreted as a code, so to speak, and it's going to create a line break. So as you can see, it's also orange, it's not green as the string is, and that's generally what the \/ does. It escapes the character. So that's the keyword here. It says escape. So it escapes the n, which means that it will be ignored as a string, but it will be used as code, so to speak. So if we run that again, then while loop is done will be on the next line of code, or on the next line in this case of our console. You can also see that this empty space here is also over here. So you can even get rid of this empty space and it will still work. So there we are. Now there is no empty space at the start of the line anymore. So now a little challenge for you. Write a while loop which only prints every second value descending from 100. So it's going to print 98, 96, 94, and so forth. All right, so please go ahead and try that. All right, I hope you tried it. So we start at 100 and we go down to 0. And then instead of plus plus, we say minus equal to. All right, now it's going to print the value and it's going to go down by 2 each time. And maybe we even start at, well, in this case 100 will be included. Otherwise, what we could do is go from 99 here, but I said going from 100, so let's just see what it's going to print. And there we are, 100, 98, 96, 94, 92, 90, 88, and so forth. So it goes all the way down to 4, 2, and 0. So in these examples, it's a very basic type of code that is executed. It's really just printing something on the screen. But this can be super useful in many different applications when writing code. So while loops are not only useful for what you can see here, where we just print a value onto the screen, but they're really useful to just execute a code multiple times. And yeah, that's something that we're going to do quite often in the future. And we're going to use different loop types. So not just the while loop, but also the for loop, or even the do while loop, and of course also the for each loop. So I'd say let's just look at the next loop type, do while loops. And do while loops are very similar to the while loops, and they just differ in a small detail or small difference, which means that they don't check before they execute at least once. So what does that even mean? Well, let's have a look at this. Quick pause. So you're learning something about Android in this video, and I hope you enjoy it. If you want to learn everything that you need to know to become a real Android developer, then definitely check out my Android Masterclass, because in this course you're going to build a bunch of great applications along your journey to becoming an Android developer. First, you're going to learn the Kotlin basics. Then you're going to learn to build one app after another. And while you do that, you get a bunch of demos which will really dig deep into the concepts, as well as presentations which will help you to understand what you're learning. So don't miss out and get the course right now. You can find the link in the description below. Let's say we have this variable, again, this variable x, and let's say we start at 1, and then we do the following. So we do, and we only do while, but we do at least once. All right, so I'm just gonna write down the syntax before we do anything else. So I'm going to use this x again. Actually, let me set that to 1 here. It was 100 here. So let's leave it like this. All right, so we have this variable x, and then we have this do keyword, curly brackets, and then we have this while keyword. In those curly brackets, it's important that we get to a situation where this while statement is not true at one point anymore. And it's done by incrementing x in our case. So in this case, this do while loop will be run 10 times. It will go from 1 to 10. So let's print something here. I'm just going to print X here. So nothing too fancy again. And I'm just going to say print do while loop is done. So there we are. It says do while loop is done. Let's scroll up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so forth. And then the do while loop is done. So how is that different to the while loop? Well, the difference is that, let's say our X is not 1, but it's 15. Then this condition is not true because 15 is not less or equal 10. It's higher than 10. But the code will still be executed at least once. Let's just see what that really means and how that looks like. And there we are. It says 15 and do while loop is done. So it printed 15, but it didn't do the rest of the iteration. So it didn't run 10 times or however many times. It really just ran once because the condition is not met. But still, it ran once. And that's something that is really important sometimes. So when would you use a do while instead of a while? Well, there are multiple applications, but let's say you want to run an execution on multiple users of a list, but you need to get that list from a server. So what you would do is you would try to establish the connection to the server, and only as long as the connection to the server works, you want to print the names of that list, or you want to work through that list. And that's something that you would do first, and then you could check, okay, is the connection established? And if it's established, then run through the list or do the execution. So I'd say let's just check out for loops to see the third type of loop, which is very similar to a while loop. Before we go to the for loop, I wanted to show you another application of the while loop because it will make it a little more clear what the difference is and when to use what. So for example, the for loop is really there to iterate through ranges, arrays, and so forth. And we will see what that means in the next video. But before we do so, we will have to look at while loops, which are great to execute a block of code repeatedly as long as a condition is met, as we saw earlier. So let's have an example where we don't look at numbers, because so far we only looked at numbers. We said, okay, var x, as long as x is y, then do something. But now, let's say we have the situation where we have a variable called felt temperature, and that one will be cold. So let's say we are in a room and it feels like it's cold. So we don't know directly what temperature it is in terms of degrees, right? In terms of degrees Celsius. So we have also a value called room temperature, which actually is that value. So let's say 10 degrees. And now we will run a while loop, which will increase the temperature, the room temperature, by 1 degree until it's warm enough so that the felt temperature is not cold anymore. So here we are just going to say, as long as felt temp is cold, please run this while loop, which will, as I said, increase the room temperature. So now, of course, we still need a situation where this condition is not met anymore. So we need to create this situation. So we can check if the room temperature is greater or equal 20, then set the felt temperature to comfy, so to comfortable, so it's not going to be cold anymore. And also print something onto the console, println, it's comfy now. So now if we execute this, it will just print it's comfy now. Why is that? What happened in this whole thing? Well, we set the felt temperature to cold, because when it's 10 degrees Celsius, then it's pretty cold and you don't want to be in the room when it's that cold. You want it to be 20 degrees Celsius, which is 68 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, so what you say is, as long as it's cold, please turn up the heat. So increase the room temperature by 1. And as soon as the room temperature hits 20 degrees, then set the felt temperature to comfy. So now in the room, we feel like, all right, it's comfy. It's a good temperature. We can maybe even get rid of our jacket. And then we can print it's comfy now. And our while loop will stop. So at that point, our while loop will not increase the room temperature anymore, and it will jump out of this whole loop and execute whatever comes afterwards. So this is just another application where you see that it doesn't have to be an integer that we're checking here. It can be whatever condition that has to be met. And as soon as this condition is not met anymore, the while loop will stop executing its block here, its body, its code block. So now we are going to check out for loops, and they are used to iterate through ranges, arrays, collections, or anything that provides an iterator. And you'll learn about iterators, arrays, ranges, and collections in the future lectures. So no worries there, but basically it's just a set of values that are stored in one construct or in one type of data type. All right, as we've seen, there are multiple different data types, such as ints, doubles, strings, and so forth. But there are also data types which can store many values at once, and they're types of collections or iterators. All right, so what we can do is create for loops as well in Kotlin, and a for loop is also very similar to a while loop. So we can just go ahead and use the for keyword, and then num in 1.10 and execute some code. And I'm just gonna execute, actually I'm gonna execute it in one line. I'm just gonna say print num in a string. All right, so this for loop here, which we have in 3 lines, so to say, is the same thing as our while loop that we had here, where we needed to create a variable, then we had the condition, then we did the execution of something or write something on the screen, and then we needed to take care of the condition at one point not being met anymore, and that's it. All right, but now we sum everything up, so it's a lot shorter. So here it just says, for the number which is in this range of 1 to 10, please execute the code in the block. And in our case, we just do something simple where we just say, okay, print the number that you're currently looking at. So if we run this, we can see that it just prints 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth, up to the point where it's 10. So where the value is 10. All right, so this is just one way of writing a for loop. There are other ways as well. You can also, instead of saying num in so and so, you can say I in 1 until 10. So that will pretty much give us the same result, where we, for example, just print I, and I'm gonna add an empty space here. Let's run this. And we can see that it printed the 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 and so forth from before, from this for loop. And then we have this 1 empty space, 2 empty space, and so forth from this for loop. So here we just use this until keyword, where we just say, I want to have I in a range. So this here is a range where it says start at 1 and go up until 10. Now it goes the other way around as well. You have seen the keyword down to, so please now go ahead and try to build a for loop which goes from 10 down to 1. Okay, I hope you tried it, because we just used this keyword already, so I thought it would be a great idea to use it in here as a little challenge. So for I in 10 down to 1. All right, and I'm just gonna say that there should be a line in between so that we see that this is the down to approach here that we had. And there we are, 10, 9, 8, and so forth. So what can you do if you want to have steps of not 1, but let's say steps of 2? Well, you can simply add the keyword step in here and then say how big the steps should be. So down to 1 with the steps of 2. If we run this, then we will see 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, and nothing else. That's it. So there's another way of writing this, what we have here. So this down to approach, and in general for the for loops. So this is pretty much the same as doing the following, as if we had this line here, dot step 2. Okay, so either you write the for loop like this, or you can also write the for loop like that, where we just use this slightly different approach. All right, but you can of course do the same thing for our other for loops up there as well. So for the second one where we said I in 1 until 10, we can also say for I in 1 dot until 10. Internally, the same thing will happen. Alrighty, so these are some examples for loops. We're going to use them extensively, especially as soon as we have collections, lists, arrays, and all those kind of cool type of collections. So see you in the next video.